very good evening to you, dear viewers. It's exactly 6 p.m. Cairo local time. This is time for this English news bulletin coming to you out of Channel 2, and we begin with the headlines. President Sisi takes part in 7th AU mid-year coordination meeting in Equatorial Guinea. 60 Palestinians were killed, others were injured in Israeli occupation airstrikes in Gaza Strip. Ukraine says 4 killed in massive Russian drone and missile attack. Welcome back. The news in full. President Fattah al-Sisi arrived in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea to attend the 7th African Union mid-year coordination meeting. The president's participation comes in light of Egypt's chairmanship of the North African Regional Capability and its leadership of the Steering Committee Heads of States and Governments of the African Union Development Agency. During the summit, President al-Sisi will review Egypt's efforts to develop the mechanisms of strengthening peace and security, as well as achieving development and stability goals in the African continent. President Sisi is also scheduled to meet with a number of African leaders on the sidelines of the MYCM. The AU theme of the year is Justice for Africans and People of African Descent through Reparations. Palestinian sources said on Saturday that indirect talks between Hamas and Israel for a ceasefire in Gaza are being held up by Israel's proposals to keep troops in the territory. Delegations from both sides began discussions in Qatar last Sunday to try to agree on a temporary halt to the 21-month conflict sparked on October the 7th, 2023. We have the details. 2 Palestinian sources said on Saturday that indirect talks between Hamas and Israel for a ceasefire in Gaza are being held up by Israel's proposals to keep troops in the territory. Delegations from both sides began discussions in Qatar last Sunday to try to agree on a temporary halt to the 21-month conflict sparked on October the 7th, 2023. Both Hamas and Israel have said that 10 living hostages who were taken that day and who are still in captivity would be released if an agreement for a 60-day ceasefire were reached. But one well-informed Palestinian source said Israel's refusal to withdraw all of its troops from Gaza was holding back progress on securing a deal. The source said that the negotiations in Doha are facing a setback and complex difficulties due to Israel's insistence, as of Friday, on presenting a map of withdrawal, which is actually a map of redeployment and repositioning of the Israeli army rather than a genuine withdrawal. Hamas has said it wants the complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, which is home to more than 2 million people. The source said, however, that the Israeli delegation presented a map at the talks which proposed maintaining military forces in more than 40% of the Palestinian territory. The source added that Hamas's delegation will not accept the Israeli maps, as they essentially legitimize the reoccupation of approximately half of the Gaza Strip and turn Gaza into isolated zones with no crossings or freedom of movement. Palestinian territory. 7 UN agencies said in a joint statement that fuel is the backbone of survival in Gaza. They said that fuel was needed to power hospitals, water systems, sanitation networks, ambulances, and every aspect of humanitarian operations, highlighting that bakeries also needed fuel to operate. An international conference meant to revive work on a 2-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been rescheduled for July 28th to 29th. Originally set for mid-June, the conference at UN headquarters in New York was postponed at the last minute due to Israel's surprise military campaign against Iran. Lebanon's health ministry said an Israeli strike on South Lebanon on Saturday killed one person, the latest attack despite a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. Meanwhile, Lebanese President Joseph Aoun played down the prospects of normalization with Israel for the time being, while expressing hope for peaceful relations with the country, which still occupies parts of southern Lebanon. The Lebanese president called on Israel to withdraw from the 5 points near the border it still occupies. Aoun said that Israeli troops in Lebanon obstruct the complete deployment of the army up to the internationally recognized borders. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said on Saturday his country had achieved victory after Kurdish rebels destroyed their weapons, ending their decades-long armed struggle against Ankara. Friday's symbolic weapons destruction ceremony in Iraqi Kurdistan marked a major step in the transition of the Kurdistan Workers' Party from armed insurgency to democratic politics, part of a broader effort to end one of the region's longest-running conflicts. The PKK's disarmament also grants President Recep Tayyip Erdogan the distinction of being the Turkish leader who managed to draw a line under a conflict that has cost more than 40,000 lives and wrought havoc in Turkey and beyond. Ukrainian drone and shelling attacks killed 3 people in Russia, while Russian bombardments on East Ukraine forced the evacuation of a maternity center in Kharkiv. Ukraine said on Saturday that Russia fired more than 620 drones and long-range missiles overnight, killing 4 people, calling for fresh sanctions on Moscow to halt its record barrages. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that 26 cruise missiles and 597 attack drones were launched. The Ukrainian Air Force said it had downed 319 Shahed drones and 25 missiles, adding that 1 missile and about 20 drones hit 5 locations. Zelensky said the strikes had killed at least 2 people and wounded 20 in Chernihiv in the west, far from the front lines of the east and south. 6 people were wounded in Lviv. Also in the west, while in the east, 2 people died in Dnipropetrovsk and 3 were wounded in Kharkiv. The Kremlin criticized Emmanuel Macron a day after the French president said plans to send a peacekeeping force to Ukraine were ready should Moscow and Kiev agree to an elusive ceasefire. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Moscow would not accept any European troops near its border. Peskov also accused European leaders of a pattern of militaristic anti-Russian sentiment. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that he outlined Vladimir Putin's position on settling the Ukraine war during a meeting with top U.S. diplomat Marco Rubio the day before. He added that they discussed Ukraine and confirmed the position that President Putin had outlined, including in his July the 3rd conversation with President Trump, as both diplomats met on the sidelines of the ASEAN meeting in Kuala Lumpur. Moving to the world of business and finance, the U.S. government saw its budget deficit widen from the prior year in the October to June period as spending rose, but customs duties surged to a record after President Donald Trump's wide-ranging tariffs on imports. The Treasury Department said the budget gap widened by $64 billion to $1.3 trillion for the first 9 months of the fiscal year. The jump came after Trump imposed a 10% tariff on imports from almost all trading partners in April, alongside steeper rates on Chinese goods, steel, aluminium and autos since returning to the presidency. The EU said it was ready to strike a deal with Washington to avoid the swinging tariffs after U.S. President Donald Trump sounded out over reaching an accord. EU trade spokesman Olaf Gill expressed hope that Brussels and Washington would seal a quick deal that would prevent the return of 20% levies or even higher. But there was no breakthrough despite the EU's hopes. The EU prepared the retaliatory duties on U.S. goods worth around 21 billion euros after Trump also slapped 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports earlier this year, but they are suspended until July 14th. Russia said on Saturday that its agreement with the United Nations to facilitate exports of Russian food and fertilizers had collapsed due to Western sanctions over Moscow's offensive in Ukraine. A day earlier, the UN said that the three-year agreement signed in 2022 in a bid to rein in global food prices would end on July 22nd. However, Russia's foreign ministry said talks between two sides could continue for the sake of global food security. The UN signed the agreement with Russia on July 22nd, 2022, with the aim of facilitating exports of Russian food and fertilizers despite Western sanctions on Moscow. Moving to the exciting world of sports, as Chelsea coach Enzo Maresca admitted that Club World Cup final opponents Paris Saint-Germain are the best team in the world right now, but is hopeful that his side can finish off a successful season by winning the first edition of FIFA's expanded competition. Sunday's Club World Cup final at the MetLife Stadium just outside New York between Chelsea and PSG will kick off at 10 p.m. Cairo local time. Chelsea have eliminated Benfica as well as Brazilian duo Palmeiras and Fluminense in the knockout rounds to reach the final at the end of a marathon campaign. Dear viewers, this brings us to the end of this English news bulletin. Came to you out of Channel 2. That was Reem Tamer. Now it's time to say thank you for watching.